Yeah, so my name is Jaya. I have a variety of different hats on a kind of practical level and part of the NIM team. That's a crew that builds privacy software, and more specifically, we built a kind of overlay network that adds noise to traffic as it kind of goes across the internet and routes traffic through independently operated relays, which prevents patterns of communication from nothing being visible. We've built a kind of like VPN interface on top of that. If anyone wants to try that VPN, do come up and talk to me afterwards. We've been working very closely with Brave browser recently on also add-on Connect app walker and this sort of thing to it. So that's kind of like let's say the practice side of my work. That's it's very, very important to me. On the kind of more theory side, I suppose that's kind of where I know Susanna from us and Big Facey, which was absolutely brilliant, fantastic. Yeah, I've been kind of working on this topic of technology and power for many, many years from a variety of different angles. My interest in power and how that is distributed was also one of the main reasons why I ended up building privacy technology and getting involved in this space. But I would say like my more kind of more specific interest right now has to do with the intermediation, I suppose, between ourselves and our formation of identity via and through surveillance-based technologies, and also in relation to others. And so this kind of like production of an algorithmic society through this sort of unwitting participation that happens by engaging with digital technologies that at the same time are extracting and expropriating our kind of human stuff, let's say. So that's the quick summary, I suppose, where I'm at, both on a practical level and theoretical level.
Nice. Alexander.
Hi, yeah, I'm Alistair. I guess at the moment I'm researching and writing about the social and ecological impact of technology, and I guess that's kind of this kind of information environment of Deviant Slop is creating. So I guess that brings to the point I would say is that an awful lot of what we're seeing with AI is deviating in a very fundamental way from some of the basics of capitalism which were there in the first place. I mean, in the sense of it's going so far away from any kind of rational reality and rational connection to what's actually happening in the material environment, that it has no meaning anymore except to create more and more capital for fewer and fewer people. So that's a very roundabout way of getting around to what I'm thinking about it and how to approach it. And my point would be that it's that material reality of our technology that we have to reconnect with and re-understand and learn about and understand that kind of environmental impact. And from my work, what I'm trying to do is think about how we can have a radically different relationship with our technology, how we can rebalance our own lives so that we're thinking more about our connection to each other, irrespective of technology. So things like intentional analog practice, for example. Thinking about how we can actually resist those kind of infrastructures. There are huge data centers popping up all over Brandenburg, for example, right now. So this is a huge issue for us, and we really have to just think about the ways we use these technologies to find different ways of connecting and different ways of using that technology to actually bring us back into actually our own physical embodied beings, I think, and that's the most important thing, which would just kind of be the ultimate antidote to actual AI slop, I would say.
As a yoga teacher, so in one of my many lives, I'm also a yoga teacher in that sense of kind of, moving between like the body and the breath, and then like the daily life is so apparent when you go into a yoga studio and everyone's like, oh yeah, I'm in my body, and then they're back into the world of everything all the time. It's interesting that when you start talking about deviance, or when one starts talking about deviance, you automatically start talking about the human in the system, or kind of the material reality of the body, and I think that's something we'll come back to in a minute. But Alessandro, would you share kind of your thoughts on the
Sure.
panel proposition?
Yeah, I mean, about the deviant, I think I agree with Jaya in the sense that I don't think there is any outside from the main tools through which we distribute cultures today, that are algorithmic tools that we don't have any ownership on it. But at the same time, I think that in this relationship, there's still a space for agency, and I think that maybe something that the more like privacy maxing narrative gets kind of wrong is that people are still feeling that they are doing something in these systems, and it's not only 1984 top-down control. Like that's not the perception of users, like people online, you know, because like, and there is this book that I actually haven't read, but Algorithm of Resistance by Tiziano Bonini and someone else, that talks about labor and people like working for delivery services and so on, and how they develop a set of practices that are like always, you know, contracting with the algorithm. So also this kind of paranoid vision of like, I don't know, recommendation algorithm of any kind, always being applied with like 100% of success. Like, I don't think that this is actually what is happening, right? At the same time, you have to deal with the fact that every like subcultural seed or like scene niche thing, like orange wine or sardines or whatever, you know, it's being like regurgitated by this system, you know. And I think especially in my work recently, I was trying to also mark the shift between the recommendation algorithm of like Facebook and Instagram and then TikTok. And then TikTok and the For You page. Because the For You page doesn't work like a recommendation. It's not based on the social graph, but it's based on the content recommendation and clustering, which is a bit, it gives you the perception that you can access to different things without them, they don't need to be close to you. Now, I don't want to be, it's not a technical explanation, clearly. But I think we see that in the proliferation of like aesthetics and the course and these like little units of pseudo subcultural expression that is never, however, like really rooted in a community or in a physical place that is like also how historically subcultures have been developing. So I think it's not easy to find a real deviance, and probably the deviance always being reabsorbed. But also I would say that, I mean, also to connect with what Alistair was saying, like on the other end, you have this, there's also a power in like admitting that we are all part of the infrastructure and there is no outside, but that still people can find protocols of agency, I think, to move throughout this infrastructure and to still have a certain degree of expressivity and possibility. And I think artists should steer this movement, you know, and should also, as I was saying, I mean, at least that's what I'm interested in, trying to see, like in chiaroscuro, you know, in between what like even expressions that are never purely like expression for autonomy, or like they're not real autonomy because they're happening in this infrastructure, they can contain the seeds for something that could move beyond, you know. So I think there is always interesting work to do that. And maybe that's also the goal of like, I don't know, art or theory.
I think picking up on that sense of human expression then, of maybe like the desire to participate, to express, and you know, we're in a visual medium. I know that here we're also looking behind the curtain of that visual medium, but really the sharing of memes, the sharing of images, the collaboration with AI on slop imagery, you know, like, how for you is then that sense of the visual or aesthetic culture and the traveling of aesthetic culture kind of landing, and where are maybe the pockets of kind of, I guess, like aesthetic resistance? I can throw that back. Yep, anyone pick up now. You go.
I mean, about the slop, I think the slop actually was over-discussed. I don't think it's so relevant, honestly. Like the image production, like who cares? It's just shit images, right? And I mean, if some are just memes, then you can say that maybe we are like way further in the process of like loss of meaning because we have a Zang Zang Tum Tum and ballerina cappuccina, and it's not literally means anything. But I don't think that AI slop as a visual phenomenon is so interesting visually. In terms of power, you see the Gaza Tower and all that horrible content, and that's a way of like, I think, prefiguring violence or simply like propaganda in a very similar way how like historical fascisms use cinema, I think. Then for more hopeful content, I like the cyberdeck trend. So it's just like these people building, it's an online trend indeed, but it's like people building these mini computers in very personalized shells and so on. And I think it's interesting to see, I don't know, just people suing and putting together Raspberry Pis and keyboards, you know, doing these very hacker activities from a different perspective. Is usually very female coded, like way more than the typical, you know, hacker or custom computing space. So I think that's like kind of calling for another, a more like bricoleur relationship with technology, like more in bricolage rather than in engineering. So I like that. I think that's some aesthetic expression that's interesting.
I think maybe, with you, Alistair, also thinking about the sense of the analog. We heard earlier about vinyl, people coming back to vinyl. So this kind of like sense that people will always go back to an experience that is kind of deeper. Or, with vinyl, obviously the sound quality is so much, you can hear it with your ears. There's just such a difference between listening to compressed sound and vinyl sound that you can touch and move. So I think there's a sense of, analog creativity being something people still crave because of sensory connection. And I wonder in your work, when you talk about coming back into the body in that sense, how then you're watching these ecosystems evolve of culture.
Yeah, I think the issue is that it creates an environment online where it's very hard to distinguish anything which isn't the slop and is from a different position anyway. So I think increasingly people are trying to find sort of ways of creating boundaries around particular spaces so they can actually develop things which are more, I think, authentically human in different ways. I guess one aspect of that which I think is really interesting is there's a kind of sort of growing sort of community of people practicing permacomputing, and the idea is to sort of bring in the whole idea of permaculture into computing, which is kind of two quite conflicting kind of ideas. But the idea is really to understand the materiality of our hardware and understand there's a core sort of a belief in care for life, care for the chips, and really think about the fact that the fundamental microchips on which all of our digital technologies are made must be considered as things that need to be preserved and used as much as possible. And furthermore, that older technologies can be used and can be just as good and better, in fact, at doing things as newer technologies. So, like going back and finding older sort of games consoles, older computers, older different types of devices, and trying to make them work in different and simpler ways, which are far more aligned with our own human connection, but also our environmental impacts. And that has created a whole different kind of aesthetic and sort of, much more minimalized forms of digital communication, much sort of slower forms of digital communication as well. And I think a lot of people find, it's quite a niche area, I guess, but it's something that people find definitely has a kind of a more, a better way of interacting and connecting with other people and with technologies and rediscovering some of the sort of initial kind of interest and, inspiration people found in technologies, 20, 30 years ago when it all seemed sort of relatively exciting and benign, and it didn't turn into this horrific monster that we got all around us right now. So I think there's a whole bunch of different things there, and that I think really kind of links in with analog as well to find different ways of doing that. And I just think this kind of idea of creating these boundaries around things and finding different ways of actually sort of trying to block out spaces where people sort of, there's another kind of online space called the Forest OS, Dark Forest OS, which is kind of a nice little space where people have created their own social media and is kind of recognizably different. And I think these kinds of spaces are becoming more and more interesting to people, and friction maxing, and this idea of creating more and more ways in which we don't sort of get sucked into this frictionless, UX-oriented environment. I think we need all of those things, yeah.
I have lots to say on so many things that have been said just now. I'm trying to think of kind of the right way to tackle it. But I suppose, first of all, slop, I think actually slop played a hugely important role in, let's say, mainstreaming a certain kind of set of understandings around the image economy and how AI actually works. For people, so it kind of, I think it helped people understand that AI does hallucinate and that you can't always trust everything that you see, and there's been a lot of value to that in an interesting way, and it's opened up a lot of conversations around that.
On the flip side, it's also caused a lot of problems because then people don't trust what they see, and in certain situations, they do need to trust what they need to what they're seeing. So, in terms of evidence and so on. And so there's kind of, a lot of work to be done and a lot of interesting stuff happening in kind of, verifiable, like architectures of verifiability and kind of, obviously cryptography in various ways plays a hugely important technical role there. So, I think SLOP has been important in many ways to kind of popularize like a lot of cultural theory across the mainstream in a very, very quick way and immediate way. And of course, we see wonderful examples of SLOP from my perspective. There was that, I don't know if people saw the Lego videos that were being made, kind of trolling Trump and the US when they were kind of starting the airstrikes against Iran. There's interesting, fun stuff happening. There's clever ways of engaging with that whole kind of world and that image economy. But yeah, like I said, kind of SLOP also produces like noise, right, and informational noise. And I suppose that's the kind of big problem right now is like, how do you actually make sure that the stuff that really matters can get surfaced in the type of infrastructures that we're inhabiting today, and that's a far more kind of like complex and important set of questions. And I agree actually with Alistair there that there is this kind of like effort right now where people are trying to build some sort of like spaces of trust and verifiability in like their communities in various ways. And I think the kind of technical experimentation there is super interesting. The permacomputing people, the kind of like rise in popularity of group chats and spaces that have more of that kind of building on the kind of like human trust element. But yeah, I mean, when this kind of title of the panel first came up, Deviant Slop, and I was trying to think of how my work kind of intersects with it. It kind of does loosely in many ways, but I suppose, playing around with the term a bit creatively, I think it's maybe also what, on a more symbolic level, what we try and do with the kind of NIM network. It's like, okay, so slop can be also understood as noise. How can noise become a kind of cover to protect each other? And so, we're adding noise to the traffic, and that's also working as a kind of anti-AI kind of infrastructure in a sense, So, yeah, there's lots of angles there, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think when I first kind of encountered the term or kind of used the term loosely a while ago, I was like, oh, does it work? But I think really thinking in terms of what you were saying there about truth, the truth of the image, the noise of the image economy, like what is and isn't real. Obviously, we then think of that in the current context of a kind of rise in fascistic thought and action. And I think a lot about Hannah Arendt in that context and her warning that, the loss of truth is the point at which authoritarianism and totalitarianism can take control. And so I think there is a much more political angle to this sense of the noise and the slop, which I'm pleased that you brought up there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Arendt is so important to reread right now.
Yeah,
but there's another, actually Arendt came up recently in a wonderful talk that I saw by Mercedes Bunz that I think might also be relevant for this conversation. But Arendt was talking about technology as being kind of the harnessing of nature in order to kind of channel the power of nature into the human artifice. But what's actually happening with AI is it's the kind of inverse. It's the channeling of the kind of human into the artifice of the technological in order for kind of new forms of exploitation and financialization to take place. And that's something that I personally find very interesting because I'm very focused on this kind of the formation of like identity, and by nature of the formation of identity, the formation of relationships between people and the kind of production of social relationships and society, so to speak. And so I think there's something very, very deep that's happening there when it comes to that form of the exploitation of the self and the humanness and the intermediation in the formation of our own identities and the formation of our own kind of collectives that is pretty profound, very, very novel, and really needs like attention, and is also where kind of privacy tech can kind of come in and play a bit of a dampening role, a bit of protection. But yeah, that's kind of personally where my interest is right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We're about to run out of time, but does anyone have any closing reflections just on that one or anything else that we have discussed?
Yeah, I just had one thing I was thinking about with this, and so to my mind, I used to work a lot on disinformation actually, and a lot of previous projects I did a few years ago with actually a lot of people here, with Marek, I did a disinformation project, also with Tatiana and Jonas, and that was a really important thing to be looking at a few years ago. But then increasingly it became clear, and I think that with AI and with this kind of slop, then I've moved away from disinformation as an issue, and I wondered, I was reflecting on that recently, and I realized that the problem is that, when the people who own the platforms are actually pushing the disinformation, whether it's slop or whatever's going on in x.com now, it's like the disinformation is not the problem anymore. You can't continue thinking about that as the thing you're focusing on, because the kind of people who are owning it are actually pushing it. So the problem is a higher level. So I think when we're looking at these things, we really need to look at the ownership structures of the actual infrastructure that is actually pushing the stuff out in the first place. That's a really critical element of this.
Yeah, maybe just that exactly. I also think it's more of a power dynamic thing. So it's also important to build counter infrastructures and counter power. And I think also bringing people together and realizing how much these technologies are shaping our identities, and large language model very rapidly, so the way we work and so on. So I really think is important to also develop what I call like tiny protocols, but like ways of engaging that are like shared and can somehow preserve the friction and the human side of things. So yeah.
I think about that as well. And I'm a writer, and sometimes I now think in like, meme text or in like Instagram caption, and I'm like, oh God, that's horrible, and it's in there. Thank you so much for a fascinating panel. Thank you.